Thank you for joining us for the second lesson on how to punctuate sentences. In our last lesson, we learned that there are 4 types of sentences, and we covered simple and compound sentences. In today's lesson, we will cover complex sentences. So in order to understand complex sentences, you need to remember conjunctions. Now, these are words that help to connect words, phrases, and clauses. There are 3 types of conjunctions. Last time we covered coordinating conjunctions. Today we are going to focus in on subordinating conjunctions. Subordinating conjunctions are able to easily be remembered using a special acronym, and that is AWUBUS or AWUBUS, however you want to pronounce it. But basically what you want to know is that those letters AAA, WW, UBBIS help us to remember very common subordinating conjunctions. Now, those common subordinating conjunctions include the words after, although, as, when, while, unless, because, before, if, and since. These are not all of the subordinating conjunctions, but these are ones that we use quite a bit. Now, in order to really understand how subordinating conjunctions create complex sentences, you need to make sure that you remember clauses. So clauses are groups of words that do contain a noun or pronoun actively doing a verb. And we have 2 types of clauses. The first is an independent clause. This is a synonym for a full sentence. This is because the clause contains a subject, a verb, and it completes a full thought, so it can stand by itself. The other type of clause is a dependent clause. A dependent clause does not complete a full thought, and it cannot stand by itself as a full sentence. Therefore, it needs to join with an independent clause in order to become a full sentence. So there's a reminder about the independent clause and a reminder about the dependent clause. Now, if you think about things that depend on others, maybe you're a dependent variable in an experimental design model, or if you think about being a dependent and depending on your family in order to survive, that might help you remember that a dependent clause needs to join an independent clause in order to form a full sentence. Now, whenever this happens, we create a complex sentence. So a complex sentence is made up of an independent clause joining with a dependent clause, or a dependent clause joining with an independent clause. Either the dependent and the independent clause can come either at the beginning or the end of the sentence. They can switch places. All right, so going back to our AWUBUS list, here's how these come into play with the clauses. So in order to create a complex sentence, you're first going to start with an independent clause. And then we're going to add one of these subordinating conjunctions to the beginning of it. Now, when that happens, that makes that independent clause dependent, because these subordinating conjunctions are words that take a full thought and make it no longer complete. Let's think of a very simple sentence. The sky is blue. Very simple. Let's add that word because to the beginning. Because the sky is blue. Well, what happens because the sky is blue? We don't know. We need that independent clause to join up with it in order to complete the sentence. Now think back to elementary school. You might have remembered your elementary school teachers telling you can't start a sentence with because. It's technically not true, but your teachers were telling you this because they didn't want you to create a dependent clause when you were trying to write a full sentence. Instead, maybe a better way to teach it would be to explain how to write that complex sentence like we're going to do now. All right, so let's look at this example. There is that sweet doggy Gus, and you will notice that Gus has on his raincoat. So we're going to start with our simple sentence. Gus wore his raincoat. That is an independent clause, has a subject, Gus, verb, wore, completes the full thought. But let's add a subordinating conjunction to the beginning. Because Gus wore his raincoat. Well, that is no longer a full sentence. We don't know what happened because Gus wore his raincoat. So in order to fix that, we need to add to it an independent clause. So because Gus wore his raincoat, he remained dry and happy. So look here. We started with our independent clause. We added our subordinating conjunction, which turned that independent clause dependent. And because a dependent clause needs an independent clause to make it a full sentence, we've added he remained dry and happy. Simple, right? Let's look at another example with our sweet boy Gus. So Gus poses like a puppy model. Independent clause. But when we add that subordinating conjunction while, we now have turned that independent clause dependent. While Gus poses like a puppy model. Again, well, what happens? So, not a full sentence. To make it a full sentence, we need to add what? That's right, an independent clause. So while Gus poses like a puppy model, I take pictures of him. That clause, I take pictures of him, is independent, so that completes our sentence. So again, to review, we started with our independent clause, Gus poses like a puppy model. Because we've added that subordinating conjunction while to the beginning, we've turned our independent clause dependent, and now we need to add the independent clause, I take pictures of him, to form the sentence. Think you have it down? I think you do too. Now I want to take this up one more notch. I'd like to invite you to notice something, in addition to noticing that sweet picture of Gus. Look at this sentence. I take pictures of Gus while he poses like a puppy model. Now look at this sentence. While Gus poses like a puppy model, I take pictures of him. Same idea, many of the same words, just a different order. Now, there's one other difference when it comes to how we write this sentence. Do you notice it? Perhaps you've noticed the comma. In the example at the bottom, when we start the sentence with the subordinating conjunction, we have a comma separating that first dependent clause from the independent clause that follows. In the example at the top, when the subordinating conjunction comes in the middle of the sentence, we do not include a comma. That is the comma rule that we need to remember. So we need to note that the comma rule changes depending on where the subordinating conjunction is located. So, there's a very sad picture. When the subordinating conjunction comes at the beginning of the sentence, you include a comma after the dependent clause. After I left, comma, Gus waited by the door for me to come home. However, if we change this up and we put that subordinating conjunction in the middle of the sentence, no comma is needed. Gus waited by the door for me to come home after I left. Again, notice no comma when the subordinating conjunction comes in the middle of the sentence. All right, Gus and I thank you for joining us for this flip lesson on subordinating conjunctions and complex sentences. We will review these in class tomorrow. Have a great night.